Welcome to the Coldplay Culture podcast, where we discuss tech, gaming, health, and the world around us.
Welcome back to Coldplay Culture podcast. Rui, Logan, back at it again. Today we have a new friend joining us. Dan, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, doing good. How about yourself?
Good. Very good. Dan is joining us to as an application developer to talk about all things F#, if we can stay on topic. I personally have no experience with, or very little experience with F#, and as we've been working together and coding periodically, just learning about how all the new C# features, like F# had it first. It's a little bit more, and even discriminated unions was like more easy or easier in F# when they brought it to C#. It's like certain things just work better from a functional perspective, and a lot of the C# things are going that way with the new switch expressions and all of that stuff. So first off, like, how did you fall into getting like a deep wealth of knowledge on F#?
That really started just as a personal side project. It's kind of the things where you're driving along and you see this thing under the corner of your eye in technology, and you're just like, oh, what is that? That kind of interests me, and what's this thing all about? I think it started with the functional programming in general. There's a lot of similarities between it and just the way you think about making a compiler, and I was always kind of good at that stuff in school and things like that, and a lot of the things that they were touting kind of hit home. So I just kind of explored it, and it was kind of like, I don't know this, let me just learn it as a thing. It's kind of like just set myself a challenge. That was kind of cool.
There was like other ones from Microsoft that fell by the waywards. I'm not lumping F# into that. Obviously it didn't, but there was like J#.
Yeah. This was all back in like 2002. Iron Ruby, Iron Python, like a lot of them were just like, hey, this one was supposed to be OCaml, which is a functional language, but in .NET. And like, how can we apply this language to .NET?
Right.
And I think it's good for the space because it makes the not the C# languages developers really think about things, but it can go down like a lower level into IL. Because I think if Don Syme didn't work on F# and those things, you wouldn't have generics in C#. Like some like really .NET, 1.1 and 2.0 things, like those foundational pieces, you wouldn't really see, or they would have a really different effect, because forcing you into that different paradigm makes you like think of different programming in a different way, and you'll have different underlying structures that are available and stuff like that.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to like the tunnel vision limited like you don't know what else is out there. Like, how could you like say that you love, like I would slurp the soda of a C# shake like from some shifty shyster in a heartbeat. But if you're not actively trying out different languages, how do you compare and contrast and take the best of those worlds and apply it? Like I heard that, I think it's called Kotlin, which is like that newer, I don't know, Android instead of Java, it's whatever. But apparently C# developers, like Nick Chaps is on his channel, he said that, I forget the guy's name, but if you like C#, you definitely like Kotlin. But yeah, like Rui, you have a lot of this, like different languages, and when you like,
no, absolutely. I've dabbled in many different languages. I like to dip my toes in many different pools, so to speak. But on that note, what was the purpose of? I have a question. What was the purpose of J#? Was that some kind of failed experiment at like mimicking Java? Is that what that was?
say before my time. I saw the book in chapters as like J Sharp for Dummies, but like that's the book I
Yeah.
didn't open.
So J Sharp is for dummies, or is that? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
it's, it's
exactly.
like it's
I was
like
trying to make a
J.
pun, but that
Yeah,
didn't work.
there's like a dummies book I had in my office one time. It was just on my
Mhm.
shelf, like, and it was like back when you had to go in to work, like, so like there was like a manager that's like, he like really thought I was, like him and I are still friends. He's like, hey Logan, you got to turn that book around. It just like when I just glanced by your office, right above your head, it says like Microsoft Access for Dummies,
And it
right?
had an
I'm
arrow
like,
pointing down, like
yeah, and then like some like
right under
floating
you.
emoji arrows like pointing. It's like, how are those things like floating, right? So do you think that F sharp,
J
J
Sharp.
sharp became C sharp because Java, they ripped off Java a bit,
Oh
right?
yeah,
There was
totally.
that kind of, like
That's
we
why.
need
That's
to make a
why.
Java.
That's why .NET exists, right? It's because
Yeah,
they were trying
exactly.
to, latch on to like, okay, like Java is really popular. Let's do it at Microsoft. Can we like switch our Visual Basic guys into like, I don't know, a different Microsoft thing that's a little bit
Mhm.
newer or whatever. Let's get off of
Mhm.
VB6 and
Yeah,
create
Well,
VB6.
they
something
did it
new.
better, that's for sure. They did it much better.
Yeah,
But
people
again,
love C
it's just
sharp.
a personal opinion. But people love Java, right?
But it does. You did raise a good point, Marie. It's kind of the thing where it's kind of like a disease where I was C sharp for a good portion of my career. Like learned a couple
Mhm.
things in school, but landed on .NET and kind of stuck there. But
Yeah.
once I learned F sharp, there were so many other languages and patterns and practices that you start dipping your toe in, and you
Mhm.
find out these things that exist out there. And it's all about like continual learning and stuff like that. It's like
Yeah.
um, was I ever going to look at Haskell and like category theory and all this math stuff? I don't understand any of it, but like I've
Mhm.
dipped my toes and like know these things exist.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're sheltered from the world because it's very uncomfortable. But once you actually realize that these things exist, yeah,
Mhm.
learning all these different languages or at least different communities exist and different ways of thinking.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what opened my eyes up when I started learning F sharp is just like I now think differently and can think differently about different patterns
Right.
and practices and development techniques. Uh, F sharp has really, because of the strict discriminated unions, they have a really, really good grasp on domain driven design,
Mhm.
such to the fact that it's not a thing where you need to go and I forget the guy's name, but like the guy who wrote the book on domain driven design. I'm not reading his book because it's just so ingrained into the language. I don't need to go
Right.
and
Hmm. Yep.
do that piece kind of thing. Like you
That'd be a
just
better book for like VB.net developers or something like that because it's not so baked into like, yeah.
it's ingrained into the way you feel about the language and interact with the language that
Mhm.
it just becomes second nature kind of thing. So like the
Right.
first thing an F sharp developer will do will be they'll write out their domain and what does their program do? What is the core things and they'll
Right.
just start describing the things or they'll describe their APIs. Like what is your API? Well, it's a GET request that accepts this parameter, and you get out this thing, and you have your domain of whatever it is that you're working in.
Mhm.
The one thing that blew my mind was when you said that, essentially it's like a strongly typed or a more strongly typed Python, where like if you don't want to use Python, you could kind of just use F sharp. Like if you don't want to
That's
go
funny.
like
Yeah.
Python synonymously to F sharp is like JavaScript to like C sharp kind of or TypeScript. Like is it a direct replacement for like if let's say I'm a .NET developer and I live in a bubble and I don't want anything else other than .NET to enter my love life, would I do F sharp instead of Python?
Actually, there is a really good presentation done by one of the former uh, head F sharp guys at Microsoft, Philip Carter, and
Hmm.
he was like, "We got to stop doing F sharp is a better C sharp. We're never going to convert the
Mm.
2 orders of magnitude of developers to convert over F sharp, but it's more like friends don't let friends learn Python.
Right. It's like the JavaScript recovery class where like, hey everybody, I do JavaScript. My name is Logan. Hi Logan. You know, it's like like I got my blue chip.
I'm not trying to dunk on Python developers.
Fair enough.
It's a good language, and you get a lot of worth from just the like sheer volume of community. But like as a .NET developer, type safety is one of those things that probably you've kind of latched onto, and it's your safety net. Like, okay, if I have these classes here and I design it this way, and these are protected and these are public, like if it compiles, I run it once, and I might have to do a couple things in debugging and stuff like that. But generally, my type safety will solve me this thing. In programming in F sharp, it's the same thing. It's like if it compiles, it works in F sharp. Is like the little tagline for F sharp, because just the way you're defining your domain. And also the funny thing is you also have heavy type inference. So not only do you have the type safety, like this is a string, you're only working in strings, you're not trying to switch strings to int, you got to be explicit. You also have the type inference where you don't have to write out the types anywhere. Like you don't have to write out this is a string, this is an IEnumerable of an iDictionary of a whatever. You just say, oh, this is my variable. Like there's no
like a var in C sharp kind of thing.
It's gonna, because of the strong typing system, it is able to figure out based on how you're using it what the thing actually is. So if your method is generic, it's going to say it's generic. If your method is using specifically these things, it's going to work that way.
Nice, like a variant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's it has its restrictions though to get those benefits. That's the thing I'll say.
So like I've never like programmed in it, and I haven't looked at some code in F sharp in a while, but just thinking about it, is it just like methods that return something? Is that all it is? Like when they say functional, what does that mean?
Good topic. Okay, so C sharp is a statement-based language. Okay, you hit that semicolon, that's your statement. F sharp, there is no semicolon. For one thing, it's like, really, you did a new line. Did you need to do the semicolon and a new line to say that you're going to the next line?
Yeah.
So it is tab sensitive like Python, but honestly, that's not a problem. It's only a problem for people who think it's a problem.
Agreed.
If you did a Venn diagram of like the actual times that it actually is a problem, you find out like it's very minuscule.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What was I saying?
So like it was like a C sharp is a statement based language.
C sharp is a statement based language. F sharp is an expression based language. So which means if you type in 1 + 1 semicolon in C sharp, it's going to give you a compile error. If you type in 1 + 1 in F sharp, it's going to give you the value 2. Right. If you write an if statement, if this is true, then 5, else this is false and 5, you can store that if statement into a variable. Just like absolutely everything is an expression.
So like the newer style of like C sharp for like switch expressions could be like if everything's like that, because it'll store back to a variable.
Exactly. You always have to store it back into a variable. If you want to ignore something, you got to be explicit to ignore something. And when you do it in that pattern, basically you try and kind of chain everything together. Much like back in the Unix days where you were like doing pipes in between, like you pipe it from this thing into something else, into the third thing. Yeah. And it's that is why the pipe symbol has been starting to explore out into different languages as well from F sharp, because it's a good way to program.
Yes.
If you look
that's like your Fluent API where you would say dot then order by, or then it's like you're chaining, like your
Exactly.
Fluent API chaining is the pipe. So you would say like 1+1 pipe, 2, and then that would return true.
It's kind of like you're looking at. It's really good for like data processing because it's the way you have to write it is the way you usually think. If you look at standard C# or JavaScript like code, it's always read from the inside out. You do like 5, and then you wrap it around, to string, and then you wrap it around to upper, and then you wrap that around thing. But when you actually try and read it, you're trying to, okay, what is the thing on the inside that I'm trying to read? And then I keep on chaining like out and out and out. And then the final step is like the big statement.
So the 1+1 pipe A would assign the number 2 to the variable A? Would that be that?
Something like that. It's kind of like...
We're trying to figure out coding problems.
Exactly. It's like some of this stuff, if we do it a presentation, I would actually like show things on the screen of actually writing these things out. But it's basically like you think of your data manipulation steps all in a pipeline kind of thing. Because you're like, okay, I have this array. And then I want to convert... Step 2, I want to convert the array and do some validation on it. Step 3... I want to take those array of values after doing that, and then step 3 is like insert it into the database. And then notify the user by sending them an email, and then I want to return a success to the screen. So the way you write in F# is literally like step 1, pipe to step 2, pipe to step 3, pipe to step 4. And you can actually read it on the screen as just from top to bottom, this is what it's doing. If you did the same thing with C# or Java, you'd be like, okay, the array is in the middle or in the center, and then I wrap that around the validation, and then I wrap it around with a thing. It's why the builder pattern feels great, because you're just like, oh, like I don't have to figure out which happens first. It's just like whatever, read it top down, top to bottom, and you're good to go.
And you can still like, can you break up those different sections? Or I might be thinking about it in a C# mentality, but like, is it like, and we probably should like stop ourselves from talking about something visually, like would just like go and look at it at the end of the day, go and look at it or whatever. But like in between the different pipes, like are those different methods, or that just one statement, or
everything is a function.
Okay.
In F#, everything is a function. You have an input and you have an output. Funnily enough, everything is also a 1 parameter function. And they will do little tricks to go and extend those things out. It's kind of almost like they've proven it exactly the same as dependency injection. Right. It's like dependency injection for every single function that you had, and it's just baked into the language kind of thing. So even if you're like, execute the statement on the database has like 7 parameters, you can start to build out little functions that just go, okay, the connection string is the same. So like my configured connection string for production equals connecting to the database with the production connection information. And then you just kind of build things on there. It's like, it's very...
I do like how you can read, like if you can mimic how humans read with like a Fluent API or something, where you said like in C# you would just use obviously static extension methods with like the this keyword, and then you just chain. So you're like, var, I don't know, some variable, and then you do dot, then to string, then to database, then like you just keep on like chaining these dot. I remember in MVC, .NET Core, before like they went away from that. Now everything's Blazor. like web forms, everything became Blazor. Is like you would have in .NET Core MVC, like when you're writing in views, this big long like dot, like Fluent API all the way is like this huge block of code that's just all chained with fluent like dot expressions is very synonymous to the piping.
Here, I'll make it. I'll make it really simple for you. If you like programming in LINQ, take a look at it. Because the core of LINQ is functional programming. The core building blocks of LINQ, like Eric Merger and a couple of them, like they're big Haskell buffs, big functional programming people. They put it in .NET many ages ago and just kind of hid it away as like, oh, it's a new style of thing, where it's really it's functional programming at its core, and you get the inherent like select star from database, where this, and order by, and they all happen in steps and they all read from top to bottom. And then it's kind of the thing where you're like, what if I could do that same thing but with my own code? Is that level of power and feeling of just being able to go through your code like that is really powerful.
Cool. Yeah, like LINQ is a good example for people that if they like LINQ, then go to try F sharp. I haven't done too much of that stuff where you can actually have like a this and then like a func of T or something, and you can actually start like get into lambda hell, where you can actually start chaining different lambdas, like not EF core style of expression tree builders and stuff like that. Some of that stuff's like pretty. One guy on like a EF core podcast or stand up, where they got the whole state of the unicorn thing. He was showing how you can do like tenant IDs that are in Entity Framework Core, like part of it's like a query in EF Core that's pre-compiled, but then it's like a pre-compiled expression tree. But every time you call to this table, it automatically appends global query filters. So he built out this thing that appends tenant IDs, global query filters. And it's like one thing he said on the pod, he's like, here's the expression tree builder for the tenant. And he's like, I know like when you look at it, no one can understand it, but it works very well. But
no, it's good because you kind of touched on why LINQ is powerful. It's because it's an expression tree. Why?
Yeah.
It's expressions. So if you have an expression-based language, then you're just your whole thing kind of flows like that. It does come from a couple other languages like Haskell, where everything's lazily evaluated. Where a good pattern is basically you describe what your program is supposed to do with your workflow, and then you wrap that around with one thing that's going to be the context for how that feels, kind of thing. So like you'll describe your async workflow and all the steps that are going to be performed, and then you wait until the last step before you go, okay, now run the async thing. Up until then, it's just basically an expression tree of like the things that you're going to try and perform. Nothing actually happens until you kind of, do that last statement of make it real kind of thing.
Have you ever used the type lazy of T?
Yeah.
I've never used it. I just kind of want to use it. But I can't actually, this is not a dad joke, like coming in or whatever, but I haven't gotten around to like trying out to use lazy of T. I'm like, I'll research lazy of T, but I'm like, I'll do it some other time. It's not like an inherent joke, but like, where would you use like, because you said F sharp's very like, the expression tree is like lazily, that kind of stuff. Like where, because is it
okay
with the, how does it work? Is it at build or do you get runtime errors, or you won't get build errors if it's like expression trees?
Well, that's the thing. You basically, programming in F sharp is very interesting because remember C# interactive? It's probably something that you haven't used quite enough.
Right.
They added that a couple years ago because F sharp has it, and it feels okay in C#. There's a couple of things that it doesn't really do very well because, like, in F sharp, basically, the way you're developing, you're trying to develop in chunks and bite-sized pieces, much like Python. Python is same thing with their read, eval, print loop, their interactive session. You write a section of code, you test it right away, and you kind of interact with it as you're playing around with it. Okay, it works, I'll go on. Because it's an expression-based language, you just kind of get the results like in the little window at the bottom. You're not trying to manage an object with state and stuff like that. You're just like, run a function, look, here's some input to a function, go look at the output. And it's very easy, quick cycles for going in, testing something out, seeing if it works, and then running it. Again, like, this is something that we had live demos and stuff like that. You could just see the different flow that people go through as they're trying to build out stuff. It's the whole like hot reload, reducing the amount of cycles for developers to go through.
Yeah, like whatever the inner loop for the development loop, you do want to have that as tight as possible because, you know, it should only be the developer that's like trying to think that's slowing it down, or not slowing it down, but you want your hardware to work for you, not against you.
Exactly.
Have you seen like a big solution, .NET solution, bunch of C#, whatever, functions, all the stuff, and then a project inside there that's F#? And what is it used for? Is it
Wait,
okay? So what
can
is
you
it?
mix both languages?
In
a single project?
It is all .NET.
Yes, it compiles to CLR, right? Which compiles down to IL, right?
Yeah, exactly. It is all .NET. You can take it's really funny. You can take F# and decompile it in C# to see what they're doing. And what you'll notice is 15 lines of code in F# will be about 800 lines of code in C#.
That's a lot of bytes too. Like,
so like functional programming, because of this style, it is, you got to double check what you're doing. They do have, I don't even remember from school, like tail recursion and stuff like that. Like, so it won't like create stacks and it will just like automatically go. And so you won't get that bloat of like actual recursion. But there are a lot of defaults in the language, and it's basically, that's the way the language was designed, was just like sensible defaults. So if you follow the sensible defaults, you try and fall into like the pit of success. So like everything is immutable by default. Okay. My VPN is conking out here. Everything is immutable by default. And what that does is it basically makes it so that everything works with asynchronous really effectively right out of the box. And you don't have to worry about somebody changing your state as you're, enumerating through a list kind of thing.
So that you get all that performance benefit too with immutable objects, because you're not dealing with like stack versus heap versus whatever. You just like destroy and create a new object based on the other object. So like probably records as a concept, minus the syntactic sugar, was an F# thing, maybe kind of first-ish.
20 years ago, yeah, it's like one of the first things, because that's how it's just like, I have some core data structures. They're immutable. You can't change them. You can only create them. There's good things where just like, it feels good to go and modify them and play around with them. And there's some hidden pattern, like functional patterns that, like lenses and stuff like that. If you actually went down into like the math of it and that stuff, it's like, oh, what am I doing in all these other programming languages of like setting individual properties, when it's just like there are some core fundamental things in programming, but it's like, it's not Alan Turing, it's Alfonso Church or whatever. It's like, it's the different camp. And they had a fight back in the 50s about like which one was better, and it turns out they're both right. That's the weird thing. Sensible defaults in the language to make things so that you don't shoot nulls. Here's another one, nulls. You guys ever have to work with nulls?
Yeah.
We bane of our existence of like,
All right.
yeah.
Billion-dollar problem, right? F sharp,
Yep.
no nulls whatsoever.
Love that. Oh man, I got to get on this F sharp stuff because like I've had the C sharp stuff like going to me via IV, and I've just been completely, cloak over the eyes kind of thing.
So like no nulls in F sharp. The only time you have to worry about it is when you have to deal with C sharp developers or C sharp coming into it. When you have to walk over the other side, that's when you kind of have to deal with it and make it feel better for the other side and pay attention to these things. But
this must be one of the few programming languages that have no nulls, because as far as I know, they all have nulls, right?
And it's like that's the problem, that it only shows up in runtime, right? You're not really going to see it. That's the other thing with the. You probably enjoy with the switch expressions where they do the exhaustive-ish matching, like, hey, you missed one.
Yes.
In F sharp, because you're usually creating your own discriminated unions, like you'll say like payment method. And payment method will be, we accept money, we accept credit cards, and we accept these things.
And Ethereum. And like small bits of string.
Exactly. We only accept these three. So you create this domain in your F sharp program, and then everywhere else, it will tell you all of the places that you added a new payment method, and it will light up everywhere that you missed the thing because you're creating your own domain. So it's like you go through, you fix all your warnings, and you're good to go kind of thing. It will tell you all the places that you're not hitting all the cases that you possibly could be.
So you probably get a more bulletproof, less buggy application because of that, right?
Exactly.
Obviously, no nulls. I'm like very pro no null, like to the point where, you could be pretty bad. You could be like, you know what? From this controller, I'm going to return nulls. I'm going to return exceptions. I'm going to return, maybe an empty list, or I'm going to return the list that's populated. To the point where I'm like, no, I'm just going to try catch and like return default. Like at the end of the day, like I don't want someone using this function to like null check it. Like you're going to get something reliable if, whatever. I'm like, nulls are like, if you don't check them correctly, like so many times people check, if the list is, if the count, list.count is whatever, but then they'll get a null error exception because they didn't check if it's null first. I'm like, so many different objects, you have to check nullability differently. It's like if you have a language from the ground up that doesn't have, like if it has no nullability, then it's all for the better. Sorry, my cat just got shaved, so he's like demanding warmth, and like I'm like trying to get him to, go away in the nicest possible way. But I'm like, at the end of the day, just stay warm. We have to like put heating pads on because they've become these pretentious prima donnas where they're like, I cannot regulate my own body temperature without a pet heating pad. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have bought that cat backpack. You know what I mean? Like, but anyhow, I hate nulls.
So exceptions are the other thing. So this is more of a style of programming thing in F sharp. So it's kind of like you're designing an API. You're designing how people are going to interact with your code, and you've probably done the thing in C sharp where it's like, okay, I have to make a decision. Do I return a -1? Do I return a null? Do I throw an exception, or do I do something else? Because of the advent of like discriminated unions in F sharp and just being that's how you describe what your domain is. Discriminated unions really are just enumerations that can have data with them. So they're just enums, but it's like, a credit card with a credit card number associated with it. Like these are my three cases of all the payment methods that I accept. This one has a little bit of data associated with it. This one has a little bit of data associated with it. And it works with all the pattern matching. So for those things, it's kind of like, would you rather a method or a function throw an exception, or would you rather it to return you a successful result, a validation result, or an error result? You know, and the guy who receives this, he's just like, oh, I called a function, it returns me three cases, I just have to execute those three cases. If you go down the exception route, it's just like, oh, I have to know that this guy throws an exception and maybe I'll handle it, but maybe the argument null exception or divide by zero exception or a random exception that I'm not expecting because it's in some sort of like core .NET library that I didn't like propagate up or handle, or yeah, exceptions kind of feel bad sometimes because, you know, it always bubbles up 3 levels higher than you actually intended it to.
Yeah.
And you get to the yellow screen in ASP.NET or Blazor of like, yeah, your whole application failed kind of thing.
Yeah. Like in Blazor, they have this thing that they haven't promoted since they came out with it in 6 or 7, .NET 6 or 7, which is it's some kind of block of code that, you know, a component that they kind of they cherry picked from all the different SPA frameworks, but it's like some kind of exception handler kind of component. And then it'll show 2 different UIs, one if there's an exception, one if there's not, of like, you know, kind of like, but I'm thinking like, you know, more on like a human psychology level. If you're like going into a application and you see a bunch of errors, you're going to be like, oh, this application is buggy as hell. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like there's a whole thing of like, do you actually bubble it up? Like sometimes people are like, if development, show the whole stack trace. If production, continue. You know, like because you don't want to damage credibility of like, look at all these bugs, right? Even the word bugs are like negative connotations. Like, why does your application have bugs? Like, it's so buggy. Why are you fixing bugs? Should it not have bugs? I'm like that kind of stuff. But the exception handling in C# specifically also has a lot of resources assigned to those exceptions. They're not very performant to throw.
Yeah, no, and yeah, exactly. It breaks the stack. You have the bubbling problem. You have also have the human element of like developers who don't want to do the thing and they'll just wait until like, oh, I'll just make sure that I have a global exception handler, and that global exception handler will like handle everything. That way I don't have to handle this specific error. When it's this case, like, no, you're processing a credit card. Like, handle the error here in the business side of it, so that you actually can, you know, do your retries or you know, do the things. I'm saying these are the only 3 things. It can either work, it didn't work, or there's a validation issue. Like, these are the 3 things. Like, these are the only options coming out of this function. There's no other cases that you have to handle, kind of thing.
Yeah, I do like the reliability of that. I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, you're going to get back these 3 things. You know, and if you're not, there's no way, like, unless the service is down. But at that point, if like, whatever, and we don't have to talk about that, but like the whole credit card thing of like, this is atomic, you know, like Azure SQL Ledger of like, no, there was something written there. Everyone agrees. The ledger has been validated. It's like a blockchainable ledger of reliability, right? Like that whole thing of like, you just want to call something and get something and never worry if it's, you know, been mutated and it's always not null and all that stuff. It's like reliability is really important with functions and all that stuff. People develop this trust over time when like, no, it'll happen. It went into some kind of queue or, you know, whatever. It's there, whether it be processed or not, you know.
How's the memory management in F# compared to like say C#? Does it operate the same way?
It's done at it is
it's all the same, right? So I'm
So
thinking
it has
for like
GC.
it is only the patterns that you're using
okay.
when you're programming. So like F# is functional by default. So which means that you can use classes, you can define classes, you can do procedural programming if you really want to. And it's basically going to be like the times that you need to care about it
Right.
are going to be the times that you would actually spend time to look at the data structures that you need to work on the thing and do the thing. If you have an array of 100 items, are you going to care that it takes 100 picoseconds versus 110 picoseconds?
Hmm.
No. But if you have like a billion items, you're probably going to have, 7, 8 engineers around a table and figuring out the minutia of the thing. If you just
Right.
have that like 100 items, then you're just going to write it in the easiest way it's going to be to debug the statement kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, you're getting back to that one thing we didn't loop on is the same project. Like you, and you mentioned that you added one in. Like, what was it for? Testing? Was it for like a Python level of
this is
like, yeah,
perfect. Perfect
yeah,
segue.
yeah.
Okay, so F Sharp has something called type providers. It's kind of like the code generators in C Sharp, just with a different flavor. Um, at their core, they generate code, okay? And they generate compiled code. So they actually generate like things that the compiler will do. You can do anything with type providers. They're really amazing. The best use of type providers that I've seen for code generation are the ones that I use to make myself look really good at work. So you can point a type provider at a Excel document, a piece of data, a database, some sort of metadata,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
it will generate a class based on that metadata. So I have a type provider that I did for database conversion, and this is like one of the primary uses. I would always use F Sharp, where
Mm.
um, they gave me a set of data that they needed to do data migration from one system to another. Okay, and we don't have any ETL stuff, extract, transform, load stuff here
Yeah.
installed, or things that we can use. So the only thing was like the data is small enough, just create a script for it or whatever.
Yeah.
So F Sharp, you point the type provider at the CSV, the JSON file, the whatever,
Mhm.
and it's just like a one-liner in your project, and then you go and load the data, and it will give you a class that looks exactly like your JSON, a class that looks exactly like your CSV or your Excel document that you have, or your database table. And it will pull back the things of like, oh, we looked at the first 100 rows of your
Mhm.
sample. This column is a date time. This column is a string. This column has missing values in it, so it's an optional string or a nullable string. And then you go and program it with it, and you're like, oh, go insert it into this table. You have another type provider pointed at the database. The database will come back and look at the metadata of the database and say, oh, this column is not nullable. These two types don't match up. You're trying to put a not nullable thing and or a
Mm.
nullable thing to something in the database that's not nullable. You're going to have to handle that, and gives you like a red error message in your database. Um, so I was working through the sample of like 100 records or whatever, and it was time to like do it, do the real thing where you have 100,000 items or whatever.
It is time.
Um, it
It's
is
like
time.
from Lion King. It is time. And then
It
you
is
actually have to hit prod and do this whole like, okay, here we go.
right. Okay, so you put in the live sample into the type provider. It goes back. It regenerates your class structure and whatever from the sample. This is all like while you're compiling. So if you like
Yeah.
replace the file on your thing, or you might have like a version 1 to version 2 sample for your JSON. You're
Mhm.
targeting a different piece of the API, and all
Yeah.
of a sudden the compiler lights up things where it's like, oh, I know for like the first 100 records in your original sample, like the middle name was all filled out. But guess what? For like a couple of random samples in the middle where you had some bad data, guess what? Your entire name is optional here. So it's
Mm.
highlighting in your compiler that you have like issues with your data, because now instead of like this should have been a date time, but somebody decided to put a string in here and then an integer in here, and the columns all get shifted over. And like, it highlights in your compiler that like, hey, there's an issue with your data. Your data doesn't match how you're trying to use it, kind of thing. This is no longer a string. This is no longer an integer. There's some string values in here.
Right. So if you were
and-
tasked to like kind of provide some integrations between, let's say your ultimate destination is whatever database vendor, and you wanted to like program a bunch of integrations, Oracle, Postgres, JSON, any kind of OpenAI kind of like, I don't know, any flavor of data in like SSIS style, would you do what you did in F Sharp, like kind of make this ETL data integration package?
For this weird one, yes, because not only did they switch up like or have like injected bad data, they switched database providers midway through.
Ooh.
And when they did that, it was like, oh, this column was an integer in this one, but it's a byte in this one.
That does bite.
So that's like highlighting something like, so all I did was like change the connection string for the type provider. The type provider takes over in the compiler and does the code generation in the background. And all of a sudden it's starting to light up all the things where like, oh, hey, by the way, dude, like when they did the conversion of the database from MySQL to SQL Server, like they changed all these columns. This column doesn't exist anymore. This column is now a byte instead of an integer. You probably have to go and look at that. And then you just have to walk through and go like, oh, does this actually make a difference? Okay, how am I actually going to handle each of these things? You
Right.
fix all the compile errors, you run it, it's good.
Right. Have you used SSIS?
No, like we don't have most of these tools.
Fair enough. Yeah. So like I did back in the day, and just imagine a visual editor where you have this table and then a line drawn to it like a UML diagram, and then it goes to here. So destination and source. And then you have like along the way conversions, this column maps to this. But you wouldn't really know if it'll ever work until you actually run it. And then it'll be running. You're like, oh, why did it fail? I don't know. Like, so obviously there's not much Microsoft push to evolve SSIS. There's other things. And I'm drawing a blank on their Azure variant of that. I think it's Data Studio. There's like so many, like by the time you learn something in Azure, oh, that's deprecated because now it's not even called Active Directory. It's called Entra or some like, okay, you guys slow it down like a bit. You know, you guys are good, but we're still catching up. But that sounds like a strongly typed version of like SSIS or, so to getting back to the question, would you, or was it just like, this was a perfect project for it? Or?
This is a perfect project because it was like, we don't have the tools to do the ETL, or like they switched they switched from a public cloud to a secure cloud. So the tools wouldn't have been available anyways. Or they're like the requests on the side of your desk were just like, hey, can you like convert this or like do this thing with this data? I don't want it in this format. I want it in this like other format. When it's like, oh, you wouldn't have an ETL for that. It would just be like, oh, you just need a developer to like chunk through or do some data processing.
Yeah.
Totally would recommend that kind of stuff for that. Going through and mucking around with data and series of data also feels really good in the language.
And the whole ETL tool thing you're talking about, like, well, yeah, also those cost money. And they're all based on things like F Sharp doing whatever anyways. You might as well go low level if you're trying to, like I was talking to you before about the huge Azure bill that just got hit because we're using a bunch of OpenAI services. Like, yeah, they're great, but you know, like Microsoft's marking them up like a little bit. And like, if you're like not expecting like a $2,000 Azure bill this month, you know, that kind of hits hard sometimes, right? So you're like, dial it back. Now call OpenAI directly and then save, you know, 2 cents on every call or whatever it is, right?
Am I going to learn Azure Data Factory?
Exactly.
Or am I just going to use like the thing that's on, like it's a one-time thing? It's never a one-time thing, but Yeah.
There's also
Am I
the
going to
low
go do that?
level, right? Yeah, like if you're going to do it multiple times, then maybe, or if there's other teams and considerations for, okay, they use it, so we might as well do it. But as soon as you go super low level, you're going to get the perf. Like Steve Gibson, who's like on Security Now podcast with Leo Laporte. He's like um, super genius level, builds all sorts of crazy time machines and things he can't talk about. But he built this hard drive recovery tool called SpinRite in assembly, and he's said why, because he just, it's not that he needed that, it's just that he knew in assembly he could build a perfect program. It's just
Mhm.
that he said, you know, Windows, like these are toy operating systems, like they're not built perfectly,
Yeah.
you know, like, so if you go super, I'm not saying like, you know, build your Blazor Maui hybrid apps in assembly. Like, I'm not like, that's a lot of work, right? We build these layers on top, like Data Studio way up here, right? But if you go a couple layers lower, you're going to get all the perf benefits of, you know, an F sharp or a, you know, you might not know why it's taking long in Data Studio, right? It could be their code, right? Like, you don't want to go too low that you're like, let's rewrite, you know, C sharp, right? Or let's rewrite the CLR. You know, that's
Yeah.
like, okay, it's okay. Like we can like, right? No, we don't get to rewrite that, but like, there is like, you know, people have gotten used to things being super quick, and if they're not, you know, thank you TikTok, thank you Google, thank you 5 gigabit up and down Ethernet, for spoiling my kids to make them pretentious enough to be like, I think I was like playing a Nintendo Wii game on like a, you know, 47-inch flat screen. They're like, why does it look like that? I'm like, seriously? I'm like, they're like, it's old. I was like, this is a Nintendo Wii, right? This, like, yeah, it's not HD, it's like 480p, right? I'm like, guys, really? Like, I'm like, they're used to like, you know, 4K, 60 frames a second, Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision, and like, I'm like, and it's lightning quick. It's like, why is it taking so long to load? I'm
You
like,
should be
oh,
all
what?
the same thing. It's like we knew at the time that this wasn't as good as the PlayStation and the Xbox, but
Yeah,
we still bought into it because of the thing that it did with the handheld. Like we
yeah,
already know it's bad. It's fine.
yeah. And we like to chop vegetables,
Yeah,
and in Metroid, it was cool. You like put in a thing, and then you turned it. It's like a key, and you pulled it out. I still remember that. Like, uh, man, a
That's
lot
a
of
good
fun memories.
segue. I'm thinking like F sharp is probably more efficient for writing Unity scripts
Mm.
instead of C sharp. I
Do they
wonder if
have
that's
C
even a
sharp for Unity?
you can use F sharp with Unity.
yeah.
I think people are trying to rewrite Doom again,
Oh wow,
and yet another thing
in F sharp,
in F sharp. Yeah. Um,
Doom Sharp.
you'll get a
uh,
performance
It
boost.
does. It's the thing is it does. It's a performance boost for the developer, I would say, especially like
Hmm.
for writing these scripts and stuff like that. It definitely is because you do get a lot less code, and you
Yeah,
don't have to learn another language like Python, which feels really good for scripting. When
right.
you're learning a new language, there's usually two things you got to learn. You got to learn the language,
Hmm.
and then you got to learn the environment, and then you got to learn the IDE. With F
Right.
sharp, all your if you were a C sharp developer, the only thing you have to learn is the language. So
Hmm.
you already know how system.collections.generic works. It's the same thing. The only thing you have to
Right.
learn is like the little language nuance. So if all you need is like a little scripting language, just give it a shot and try it because it's going to be less code. You're just going to read it top to bottom because that's how the language flows and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And it's real, and because of the way you program is just interactive. Like you write a section, you run it immediately, you get the
Right.
result. You're always testing and playing around with it. You don't have to hit F5, wait a couple minutes for it to compile and load up the console program, have the console program, run start to finish, and then read the thing, right? Like
Hmm.
it's very interactive to work with the language, kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I'm going to
Sounds
try
good.
F sharp for. I have a thing that will run pre build or post build on a component library I built, and it builds out all of these sample pages for each of the components. Like you have a text box. Here's all your permutations of this, Blazor component, and it's a CLI for building out those Blazor pages and stuff like that. And it just runs top to bottom. It's a script. I'm just going to see if I can fork that. It's very small, like as a POC for like F sharp, and I'll just be like, hey, this is going to be another thing that runs pre-build. And then just, would it be good for that, you think?
Oh, totally. Like anything scripting based is a good way to like edge yourself into. Or
Cool.
definitely like I usually use like the same exact program. I've just rewritten. It's how like I know this hobby. It's my thing. It's could be like fantasy football or whatever, where it's just like this is a thing I'm interested in, and then I write the
Mhm.
thing, and then I rewrite it. Oh, I need to learn this other thing. Okay, well I'll rewrite it again and add this other module, and now I know how Azure Cloud works or
Yeah.
this graphing library works or whatever. And you just keep on like rewriting the exact same problem. You're not
Mhm.
having to learn the problem. You just have to learn the specific language kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now
Um,
I'm thinking about it like when I'm asking Chat GPT 4 for like, hey, how could I do this in this scenario? And they're like, and it's like, blah. And I'll be like, can you give it to me in F sharp? And it'll be like, okay. Like, and then it'll
exactly.
just
It's so
allow you
easier.
to
It's
like
much
see
easier now.
it. I'm like, wow, is that 2 lines versus like 20? Um, and then so last question here before wrapping up. If you're first time tuning in or just, you've found this on Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere, and you're kind of interested in getting into F sharp, Dan, what would you recommend for that? Like you coming from that area where I'm going to experiment, try it out. Like now that you've gone through the gamut of like, falling in love with a language, just really embracing it and it being the gateway drug to Microsoft's, mule of options. What would you
A-
recommend for developers getting into it?
And in addition
Um,
to that, give us some info on the marketability of F sharp.
Mm,
Marketability of F sharp is a fun one. It is hard to find F sharp developers because of just the sheer order of magnitude of C sharp developers. But if
mm,
you do find an F sharp developer, they are very valuable because they're the guys who go outside of the fringe and have the extra ideas to learn those new languages. It's like if I came to you with a guy who knew like Clojure and Haskell and Scala and C sharp and like a laundry list of things, it's like, you're doing that for your hobby. Like programming is your hobby, and that's the kind of
mhm.
culture that I want here.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of doesn't have to be F sharp. It's just those are the kind of people you'd be looking for.
Right.
And then if you give them F sharp work, you can just pay them dirt money. They will just do the job because they enjoy it.
Mm.
Mm,
That's the whole thing. Um, yeah, F sharp has a certain number of spaces that feels really good for data science, working with data and stuff like that. And if you don't want to like introduce that whole other platform of like the whole like polyglot thing of .NET and the Python is over here
yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're using this other thing over here. F sharp like transpiles into all of those other languages anyways. So even if you have to interact with those things, like I never have to write JavaScript. I never have to write Python. I can write a React application without actually knowing how to use React. Like it translates into so many other languages. I didn't even talk about that side of things in this
Mm.
podcast. Um, those are the
Second
strengths.
podcast, front end F sharp, F sharp for front ends, and it'll be like front ends with like a sharp symbol at the end, but
Exactly.
that'll be V2. And then getting into it for new devs.
I'll do some call outs to some things that really helped me out. There's obviously the Try F Sharp stuff online. It's got tons of good resources. Some of the things kind of require you to be already into it, so I won't go into those ones. But there's one that is called F Sharp for Fun and Profit. There's a guy named Scott Washin. He does some really good explanations on it, even down to like the difference between C# and F#. And he basically walks through the entire presentation of like, oh, by the way, did you really need those curly braces? Let me just remove those curly braces. Did you really need public? And then you'll show the entire progression from like one language to the other language. And he's really good at underlying those. A good series on something called railway-oriented programming. It's always kind of like hidden functional meanings, but kind of just makes sense. Yeah, F# for Fun and Profit is really one that I'd suggest starting out with.
If you can send that to us, we'll make sure it's included in the show notes so people can just scroll down on whatever their favorite, platform, YouTube, whatever. There'll be a link to that kind of stuff. It's available on YouTube or like all of that stuff, or
Yeah.
okay.
So I'll send some good resources and stuff like
Cool.
that for getting your toes into it. And then just as for learning stuff, I would suggest Advent of Code. It's something that runs in December, where they just give like different math problems or different computer science problems, and you go through the whole December unlocking each one, and it's a good way to learn new languages. Should be starting up in a couple of weeks. So they do like the traveling salesman problem is like day 18, and they usually have like a challenge step of like, you'll be able to do the basic example, but you'd have to actually kind of think of it to do the advanced example, because it would like, you add too many cities or too many recursions. And if you didn't like think about it, it's a good challenge for programmers to learn a new language kind of thing.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. We'll have to make sure that we release this episode before December so people can take advantage of Advent of coding. Awesome. Rui,
Yep.
any last words before we walk the plank and go back into the madness that is the love of our life, which is programming, coding, gaming,
Yep.
getting back to the grind of helping people every day? Any last words before we...
No last words. Maybe a few last words. I'm genuinely interested in F# now. I feel like this was a good resource. Dan, I want to thank you for being here.
Yeah, well,
And absolutely, I'm going to take up that that dev challenge and see how that goes. What is it called? Advent of programming, right?
Advent of Code.
Advent of code. Yeah.
Advent of Code. It's
I have the memory of a fish. Sorry.
exactly,
Yeah.
and it's like for whatever language you're trying to do. It's like language agnostic, and you post your results, and they'll give you new challenges every day.
That seems interesting.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you, Dan. With pleasure. We'll have to do a V2 on F# for front ends. Thank you, Rui, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.